Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio, the show about ways to stay competitive in a changing market, break through business plateaus, and respond to the changing expectations of today's customers. Your host, Jess Dewell, is a rapid growth entrepreneur, consultant, and business advocate with a 20-year track record of business excellence. She candidly discusses how to achieve your growth strategy and realize your company's unfulfilled potential. Now, here's Jess.
Hello, welcome to the Voice of Bold Business Radio. You're in the right place for conversations about current needs that we as business leaders face regarding technology, changing customer expectations, and quickly changing markets. You know, this program is all about what it means to reach our short-term goals while thinking about and creating confidence in our long-term positioning. Because that's what we know. We know right now. We know what's happening in front of us. And so we have some concept of what the trajectory of where we're going is, but how do we get there? Well, today we're talking about it through intentional growth. And specifically around intentional growth, you're going to hear topics that we're going to cover regarding culture, regarding the way we think, regarding the way that we interact with each other in our workplace, because all of those things shape the trajectory that we are on, shape where we're going and what we're doing. And I'm excited to say that today I'm talking with Reagan Freed. She is the principal consultant at HRQ, and she brings 17 years of progressive experience in human resources, supporting small and mid-sized as well as large businesses to develop people strategies, to find solutions that support organizational goals. Reagan is recognized for being a multi-talented and versatile problem solver. Yay, we're alike that way. And she brings a proven track record of increasing employee engagement and enhancing organizational capability that directly impact your bottom line results. Welcome to the show today, Reagan.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here with you and your listeners today, Jess.
I am glad, Reagan. You know, it was funny because technology always gets the best of us. Before you and I started talking this morning, my computer wouldn't turn on, my phone crashed, I'm like, right, today's going to be a day and we'll see what happens, because with the crew here, with Scott in the background and Eva in the background, I know we're in good hands and it's going to go exactly as it should go. What can we do except for to say, yes, we love technology, and yet we remain adaptable because of it, don't we?
Exactly.
Oh, goodness. All right. Well, let's just jump right in. And I want to start with talent and talent acquisition, because when we're thinking about intentional growth, who we're working with and who we bring to work with us really matters. So talk to us about that relationship and the important pieces of it.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And it's one that's incredibly critical, particularly for small to mid-sized growing organizations. You're typically lean, and the people you have on your team are critical to your success. You don't have room for the extra fluff of carrying people who aren't carrying that weight or aren't there with the same passion and interest in your mission that you as a business owner have. So that's one of the most important things that I help my clients with, is trying to determine what is their mission, what is their vision, and how do we portray that in the recruiting process so we're finding talent that aligns with you, that their personal values and professional values align with your organizational values.
Okay, so I want to dig into that a little bit, because it's easy to put together a job description. We've got the internet, and we've got the ones that worked or didn't work before. And we've got potentially people who were in a role that we've worked with before in a similar role that we could pull from to get that. But none of those things bring in that mission and that vision or the values. And so is there an example that you can give us about that, where here are some things that we can actually do right off the bat, change the way we're speaking and thinking and communicating for that intentional growth?
Well, a couple of things. I think first, before you even think about your job ads or what you're going to post out there, think about your target candidate profile. who are the people you think would be the best fit for that particular position? So for example, if you had a social media manager position open and you want someone who's going to bring really cutting edge ideas around social media marketing, you might want to target someone who's fresh out of school, a millennial who we know all excel with some of those skills. So then think about what that target profile is and where you're going to go find them. So a millennial is going to look for jobs in different places than an Xer or a boomer like me.
Mm-hmm.
They might, more than likely, they're going to be looking for jobs on social media. So first, I always encourage my clients, think about, identify your target profile, and then think about where are they looking for jobs. Then form your job ad accordingly. So in your job ad, I would always encourage you, never just post your job description. Though that long bulleted list should be only kept in-house and internal only, right? That's boring to have to read.
Boring. Yes.
Yeah, so the bulk of your job ad should be talking about your company and the cool things you have to offer if they come to work there. Maybe even some snippets from some of the employees about what they love about working for your company. Maybe 5 or 6 bullets about the role itself. So a job ad should just be throwing out that carrot to dangle to your candidate pool.
That's really interesting. And I know a lot of people embrace it. So let's say you see people out there and they've got their company, and I was looking just because I'm curious what's current and how do we do it at Red Direction and some things like that. And I know what I've noticed is there's still that long list of bullets.
Yes.
But there is a blurb about the company, but it's not always engaging. So just because it gets rubber stamped that everybody approved that this is language we can use doesn't mean it's a story. Yeah. And so somebody, usually you, Reagan, and the people you work with are in this place of this gap of, well, we're so busy, but we really need this to work and we want to get to those that ideal employee profile, that person who's going to thrive in this role. And it makes me wonder, is how much stress does it create by not doing that upfront work? Because then we end up we get all the wrong people applying for our job. And that takes time and human capital, our resources and just energy looking at that to weed through and figure out, is this person really the right one or not?
Yeah. And then you risk, and this happens a lot, you risk getting to this point of desperation where you just have to make a hire and then you're not hiring the right person. So putting the intention at the beginning of this process to make sure you're going to get a high quality pool of candidates will prevent you from getting to that place and help you make the best decision for your organization and for the other person. I don't want to underestimate how important recruiting needs to be a two-way street. It's got to work for both the organization and the candidate. So they will have needs in the process too that I encourage all of my clients to consider as well. And asking them that question along the way. What else do you need to know about our organization to know that this is the right fit for you?
Okay, so you mentioned this two-way street, and that makes me think of, it makes me think of a dialogue, and it makes me think of how we do relationships with a new friend, with somebody we're interested in for a potential life partner. Think about all the stuff we go through when we think about business partners or key person hires within an organization. That level of, that's what I'm taking away is this two-way street. That level of involvement is really what I hear you saying is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you could easily compare it to forming a new friendship, forming a new relationship. Consider the recruiting process, the dating period.
Yeah, that honeymoon phase. Woo!
Exactly. And then when they join your company, that's when you form that bond, that commitment. That's a marriage. And a marriage, as we all know, takes a lot of work to keep it healthy, to keep it fresh. And so that has to be the same for the employee experience that you offer as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, So we were talking earlier then about here we've got to tell our story. Here we are setting up what it's like to work, what our mission is, and demonstrating that in whatever way we can in the hiring process to attract people to our organization. And then there's that middle of the road where, they might get hired, but then we've got this is the way the work gets done. And so I call the end, they either stay or they don't, right? You either have longevity in an engaged person or you don't. And so that middle seems to be this place where it's like, well, you've been hired, you got the full story, have fun. And they get pushed into the deep end without their floaties on. And maybe they're still wearing their big shoes. Who knows? Right? And so what does that look like? I feel like what I hear you saying is there's this cohesive element that when we are, actually, I don't know, maybe I've got the munchies. I'm thinking of jelly on toast, right? I'm thinking about, you don't want jelly just on one corner of your toast. You want jelly on the whole piece of toast, right? And so if I get hired and I've been told I'm going to have toast with jelly on top, but I only have a teeny tiny bit of jelly, I already am the company is already at a disadvantage because I've got this thing going on in my mind as this new employee. Yeah. So just getting the hiring part and doing all that forward thinking work is important. Yet then when they're coming in, it's also important. And so I'm curious to hear, knowing that the way we work together matters, how do we consider that from an intentional growth perspective?
Yeah. So there's a lot of research out there to give strong evidence that when you have aligned your employee experience with your consumer experience, that is when your business is in the optimal position for growth. And by that, I mean, think of all the effort businesses, particularly small growing businesses, are putting into the consumer experience through their services or through their products. That is the most important thing to grow their business. Now take that mentality and apply it to their employees. Different perspective on it, but you want to make sure they feel just as important and valued, that you're willing to work with them through issues or conflicts, you're willing to concede on things and meet in the middle and make it work for both. That is when your employees will, according to theory and some proven case studies out there, will give your consumers the best possible experience when they feel equally valued.
So could we consider this like an ecosystem and some in and of itself? Employees that feel valued have a different outlook in their engagement with customers in whatever capacity that is, directly and indirectly, which means that's actually that place where we're leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And customers are like, fine, I'll deal with it. Or this is the way that it is. And by the way, I can think of a ton of companies that have taken that model. And I don't mind naming them right here. United Airlines, Comcast, GoDaddy's pretty good, but they're so basic and you have to wait so long for support. What is that? So the people really care, but they're still really understaffed. So what does that, and we don't know what their feedback loops are. This is just one customer that goes, okay, right. And so who gets it right? In my world, who gets it right? Infusionsoft still is way up there in my book in terms of service. Zappos is my favorite. All right, now y'all know where I'm going to shop at. Right? I mean, that's the thing. Nordstrom is still my all-time favorite. And Midas, actually, right? So if I were to just pull places that I go back to over time, they're doing something right that makes me feel valued as a customer, which means those people have to feel valued. Otherwise, it would be a tenuous connection, not of course I'm going back there.
Yeah. And Southwest Airlines is another one that.
Yes, I love that. Mm-hmm. Yep.
They consistently have case studies. Zappos, I'm familiar with their case studies that talk about the culture they're creating, how they value their employees, how they make their employees' opinions really matter, that they intentionally solicit those opinions to help them work through business decisions. That's the kind of culture that will create an employee experience that aligns with the consumer experience, and then inevitably your employees are giving your consumers the best experience possible.
So okay, yes, and this comes from the top. Really, it comes from the top. Always. We like to have bottom-up organizations. We like to have lateral organizations, but somebody's the torchbearer. Somebody's the one who says, this is what our values are. And we're going to honor and shine a light on. Here's when it's happening, we're showcasing it, right? And that's where I think the case studies, I have read about Southwest Airlines in a book called Blue Ocean. And I've also read some of the case studies from Zappos online as well. And they actually took a model from Gore-Tex, believe it or not. And so similar concept, similar model, and Gore-Tex did it decades ago. And I'm reading a book. I was hoping I was having it here. I'm only reading like 6 books at a time, right? It's called Principle-Centered Business. And it's Tom from Tom's of Maine Toothpaste. And it's his journey through growing his company to a point where he started to feel unfulfilled. And there was that point in time where there was, let's go for growth. That was the numbers oriented. We're going to get to that metrics and we're going to be very, I'm going to say clinical is the feeling that I'm taking away. And he was ready to try that, but it just didn't feel right. And then we've got this concept that he was like, he took a sabbatical and went back to school. And I think it was a theologian class. He was looking at spirituality and religion and understanding how people come together in these different ways in groups around the world. And he realized he could have both. It didn't have to be clinical and it didn't have to be just heart driven. So he and his board worked years. I mean, this is one of those things. If we are a clinically oriented business, to make the change that Reagan is talking about takes years. But we can see, this goes back to the whole purpose of the show, right? We could see the short-term impact positioning for this long-term value. And where was I going to go with that? You said listen to employees and make them feel good and feel heard. Can you share a program or a success story with from one of the companies, named or not is fine, but that you saw this? We turned one little lever and we saw immediate results that impacted our longer term change.
Yeah, I recently did some work here with one of the larger nonprofits in our market. And in a nonprofit, it's usually a really special culture already because they're so mission focused and centered, right? And so at this particular company, they were struggling with turnover, which is a little unusual for a nonprofit. They were struggling with recruitment and then attrition. And so one of the things when we went in was to try to assess from the employee perspective, what were the challenges? What were some of the issues? And what we learned is that they came for the mission. They were excited to join the company because they had a personal connection to the mission, but they were leaving for things like pay or benefits, or they didn't like things that weren't related to the mission.
Okay.
Through our listening sessions that we had with the employees, we got amazing feedback. And one of the biggest ahas was through their employment experience, they were getting disconnected from the mission. They were getting so heads down into whatever their day-to-day work is. They lost that connection and then lost the value in it.
Mm.
And so by making some quick changes to have the listening sessions, we formed an action plan off, I think, the top 7 or 8 themes that came out of that to address some of their needs and make sure they understood how important to management their experience was too. And so for that particular client, a good example was we rotated them out. We started to offer up a quarterly rotation to put the employees out into the community to really see and feel the impact of the work that they were doing. And that was so refreshing and reinvigorating for the employees. And we were able to pretty immediately affect attrition.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And that makes me think of something. I'm a big fan of Tom's of Maine right now because basically because I didn't know all of this internal working of this background. But the company that you're describing, the organization that you're describing, seems to be open and willing because they put this thing together and said, "Give us your feedback. What do you like? What do you like? What needs fixed? What's broken here?" Well, there were a lot of gripes, but when you open up a dialogue, when you're willing to ask the question, you really have to be ready for what comes back is what I'm taking away from this book. And some of the things they were like, that matters.
Yeah.
Oh, that matters. And it builds the two-way street. So, because I think of it like construction, right? When you have a two-way street, but it's down to one lane and you got construction workers on each side. And everybody's a little bit upset along the way. I have to wait. I'm late. I don't really feel like you're loving on me. How come you have to work on this when I'm supposed to be on the road, right? That happens in construction. But when we can remove that and we can get back to a full 2 lanes, it works. And we have to be willing and ready to accept some of the feedback we may not be ready for. And, with a little bit of grace. So we have some questions from our audience, and I'm going to squeeze in 1, maybe 2 now, Reagan. The first is from Paula, #VBB Radio. She is asking, what's the most challenging part of keeping the right talent?
Ooh. That is such an interesting question. And I think it comes back to knowing what your employees want and recognizing that that's not one answer. Your employees are all there for really different reasons and knowing what those reasons are. Some want super fun place to work where they can play ping pong on their lunch break. Some want really good benefits for their family. Some want to feel like they're making a difference in the community they work in. But knowing what that is will be absolutely critical to retaining your talent. And then there's a balance there too, right? Like as an organization, you can't just bend over to meet the needs of every employee. You've got to figure out what aligns with your culture, what you can offer, and where you can meet them in the middle.
Could I add, and tell me what you think about this, is that it goes back to the very beginning.
Yeah.
The challenging part of keeping the right talent is going back to did we find the right talent?
Totally agree.
And so, and being able to understand, yeah, I guess I do have the right talent. So how do we? And then also being able to go, these are great people. They're not the talent we need. So we're in a place, then that's a whole other strategy around growth, right? We've got people that like to work here, want to work here, seeing some results, but we now get to be in the messy middle of figuring out what to do while we're bringing in, I'll call it the next generation. And we get smarter from what we've learned and we learn from what we've got.
Yeah.
Okay. How about, here's a question from Fred. Do all people look for the same quality, engagement, and experience in their employers? If there are differences, what are they?
I think it's really case by case based on the individual and what's most important to them. And I think to your point earlier, knowing that in the hiring process will help you continue to feed that for them through the employee process. And I think that's where you have to set some realistic expectations in the hiring process, right? Like there are some things you may not be able to offer and that therefore they may not be the right fit for your organization. I think
yes.
And being willing, no matter how skilled or talented they are, being willing to accept that. Skill is the easy part of recruiting. Culture fit is what's harder, but most critical.
So does it depend on where we're at in our growth stage, right? I mean, if we're early stage versus mid stage versus reinvention stage, that also that how does that play a role into this mix?
Yeah, I think this, depending on the stage you're in, your organizational objectives and values might be different. So you might, if you need a really specialized skill, you might be willing to make some concessions for a particular candidate, but recognize that's a precedent you set, and they're going to expect that same treatment all the way through their life with the company. But I think each different stage that you're in will define what you can and can't do, what you have to offer, what you don't have to offer to your talent pool.
You are listening to Program 239, Intentional Growth. Keep using hashtag VBB Radio, and feel free to also email us at radio@reddirection.com, and we will be right back after this.
You are listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. In every program, we share stories, tips, and concepts that benefit short-term goals and increase confidence in long-term positioning. For additional perspectives on your growth strategy, Jess Dewell is your business advisor and consultant. Go to voiceofboldbusiness.com and click the Find Out More button to get started. Now, back to Jess.
All right. Reagan Freed is here with us today, and I am super excited that she is, because the topic that we are talking about is intentional growth. And we're talking about intentional growth specifically from the people part of the business, the people in the business that are going to live and deliver on that mission, the people that are in the business that are taking action, that are either validating or invalidating the value statements that you have as an organization, which in turn changes and determines and defines how people are going to work together, both internally within the organization and externally when you're working with external stakeholders and customers. I was thinking a lot about during the break, of course, the short break, my mind works fast. And that is, when we know what we want as a company, just like Reagan was saying right before the break, we know what we've got, we know what we have, and that is good enough. It creates the boundary with which we can find the right people to figure out the best fit. Because lo and behold, I mean, that needle in the haystack is very real, very real. I was listening to a podcast last week, and I think it was a technology company. I don't remember I apologize, everybody, but it was a big company like IBM or one of its subsidiaries. So it was a huge organization. And they said they had no problem attracting talent, but they attracted so much talent that they got bogged down in finding the right people to bring in. And so they're trying to hire for culture, but their technology was still such that there's a gap between. We've got all these people that meet these certain criteria according to our computer systems and programs, yet it's still too many to understand and filter through to find the right person for the role being hired and being added. And so, Reagan, I would love to hear from you in that perspective. When we've got technology that we are using because we want it, we need it as a part of our business, yet it's not narrow enough to help us understand the box that we've created and what we want, so we can find the best people that want to be in this box with us. How do you suggest we navigate that as a senior leadership and even, an augmented HR type role?
Yeah. This is a challenge right now for a lot of employers. A very high touch recruitment process is time consuming, and it takes a lot of resources to do it. And it can also yield you the best candidates. On the other side of it, there's a lot of technology out there that will help you narrow down your candidate pools through different screening processes, through evaluating resume against job fit. Like, there's amazing things happening in the technology space around this. But when you take the high touch out of it, those you may or may not yield the best candidates for you. And frankly, if you're the candidate going through a high tech hiring experience and you're not getting a lot of one-on-one, are they getting what they need out of the process? So trying to find the right balance between the use of technology to streamline the process, but without giving up that high touch. Your candidates need that from you. And chances are you need that too. You need a gut check on looking at somebody sitting across from you and make sure that you feel that connection and you see that passion and vision they have for your mission as well.
I'm glad we touched on this because I know, there's a lot of stuff out there that helps us automate our business because we want to be more efficient, because we want to do more. Yet we want to choose the right technology and use it in the right way that it doesn't add to the level of touch we have chosen for our organization. And I know that that's a really big deal. And it is. By the way, people say, my company is so different than everybody else every time I talk to a new company, right? My company is so different. I'm like, it's true. And the thing is, on paper though, what do? They compare features of what they've got. They compare product styles. They compare all these things that have nothing to do with what makes them unique. And this is one of the things that makes a company unique. It is a competitive advantage to understand what that ratio of technology to interaction is to get you where you want to go. So that's really something that I'm taking away from what you're saying, Reagan, is the power of owning what you want to do in your business and not compromising it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about creating a great candidate experience, consider too, those candidates are also potential or current consumers. So the experience they have with you in that hiring process may determine whether or not they're interested in using your services or products in the future, and how many other friends or family are they going to go tell about it. So that's again coming back to the alignment of the candidate and employee experience with the consumer experience, to make sure that you're maintaining that brand and reputation that you want to have in the community.
So we've talked about these processes. We've talked about the people in these roles. If we were to come right down to it, and you and me, let's say we're on a team and we need to hire 25 more people in the next quarter. Okay. And so we get together and we already know, because we've committed to knowing the profile ahead of time, what we've got to work with, how do we position that, what our story is, and how do we communicate that. When we're thinking about that, and then when we're actually also thinking about the people that we've brought on, right? So our job also, we have budget responsibility. We have fiscal responsibility to this organization and the role that we're in this fictitious example that we're putting together for this right now. There are a set of skills, core competencies that are not hard skills or checking the box type things that really matter to ensure that the growth by adding 25 people, by getting to the other revenue growth goals and not letting one thing suffer for the other. What are the soft skills, the core competencies that we need to be thinking about as an executive team, knowing that what we're talking about here really is the intentional part of the growth process?
I think from the executive management perspective, a couple of things are really important. So one, at the executive level, the reasons that you are there and the reasons you are willing to work 70, 80-hour work weeks are entirely different than probably the people under you or within the company are there for. And I hear this a lot. They're not working as hard as me. They're not as passionate about the mission as hard as me. They will never be.
That's right.
Recognizing that the reason you're there are different than the reasons they want to come join you and the reasons they will stay. So don't separate the two, and having that self-awareness, I think, will be really critical in your both your candidate experience and the employee experience you offer. Second, I think put the right people in the job. And by that, I mean, find a culture champion in your company that can be out there representing your business and your culture, whether it's a recruiter or maybe it's your marketing manager, whomever that person is. Put the right people in the job that can effectively promote and sell your company while also doing a great job of eyeing talent. And sometimes that's not always the people in the executive leadership team.
Oh boy. So turning those into core competencies, those two things, which I think are fantastic. And yes, I run into that also, Reagan. So I would say discernment. This concept of discernment, the more capacity that I have to weigh my awareness of what I'm willing to put in versus what somebody else is willing to put in versus what the company needs is a guide to be able to make decisions. Another that comes to mind is just making decisions in general, right? When we say think up front, and we're talking about that, we're not saying think up front. We're saying do pre-work to make the actual process of hiring and finding the right people better. That pre-work is as important or more important than the actual process to get somebody into our organization. And so our willingness to take the time, what is that one? I think decision making. Okay, we're talking about that. The willingness to take the time to go through the decision-making process and make sure each step is right is a pretty big deal. So I would say that those two core competencies would really support the two processes and the things that you're seeing there. From that, is there something else that comes to mind that you're like, it's cream of the crop when I find this?
No, I think you covered it. I think the other thing I would add is, and this really does probably come back to the size of the business and the stage that they're in. But I think if the business leader or the owner is still the person that's heavily involved in the hiring process and making all those decisions, also recognizing how that they are probably there to follow you because they see your vision and they want to get behind it. So your impact directly on that employee experience is so critical. Now, I think the challenge that a lot of my clients around that size have is as they grow, inevitably the employees become further and further separated from that leader that they came to follow, right? You're going to create a management layer. You're going to be out taking more of a sales role than an internal, whatever that might be. But recognizing that's also a lot of the reason why people came. They see you, they see your vision. And so as you're going through that growth process, don't lose that connection. That could be a lot of different things within an organization, but just knowing that is going to be really critical to the employee experience.
It comes back down to where do we want to be versus where we think we need to be versus what we actually need to be doing. I think that's a big part of what I hear you saying. All right. So we talked about that. All right, I'm going to go to a couple of questions because we still have some questions coming in. R. Scott is asking, all other things being equal, is it more important to hire for skills or hire for a good fit?
My perspective on this, skills are easy to find. Culture is not. I would put a lot more energy into making the right culture fit. And that doesn't mean you aren't doing the right skills assessment or making sure they have the basic knowledge and experience to do the job. But culture fit by far is what's going to retain your employees longer.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And it is time intensive. And if I go back to our fictitious situation of 25 people, added in the next quarter, it's going to seem, it depends on how big you already are. Do you already have 75 people? Well, that's growing a quarter. But if you only have 5 people, I can't even do the math in my head that fast, but some of you out there are like, yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot, right? To quadruple or quintuple your size, I might be making up words now, Reagan, by doing that. And so that pressure, I'm going to come back to something that you said. You feel pressure by the deadline to get the hires done. And so we cut corners in the process around, regardless of stage, around understanding our mission and telling the story and sharing the vision and getting people, because like you also said, you're getting people to come back. And they are there because they see themselves being adding to this bigger vision, but they don't want to be the torchbearer. They want to be the fuel. They want to reap the rewards and feel fulfilled of being part of something. And so that goes into this next question from Courtney. So thanks for letting me recap that. And then here we go from Courtney. If an employee experience is so vital for business growth, then why do we still have a problem? What's the root cause?
Based on my experience with my clients, it's the disconnect in the consumer experience and the employee experience. That we're hiring employees and bringing them into our organization to perform a skill or duty for us without recognizing how critical it is that we're engaging with them. Dialogue. What's important to you? What's important to me? How do we find those agreements in the middle so that we make this the best possible experience for them? That listening doesn't happen a lot in organizations.
Thank you. And here's one from Dave using hashtag VBB Radio. Will you elaborate more on culture champions?
Yes, great question. So I think culture is a really squishy word, and it is so different and unique to each company. Culture really, at the end of the day, is the behaviors that are exhibited in your organization. So I encourage all my clients to take an assessment of that. What is happening today? What are the behaviors? How do we treat one another? How do we go solicit feedback from our employees, and do we listen to that? So all of that factors into culture. Knowing that about your culture, one, is important. And then two, does that line up with what you want your culture to be? And more often the companies that I work with, that's where the disconnect begins. So then we need to start to aligning those two things. And that begins with us reevaluating some of the behaviors happening in the workplace to align everybody back to that. So a culture champion would be the person that emulates the right behaviors, that consistently carries your mission, vision, and values first and foremost, both internally and externally.
Wow. My brain just exploded. Because, really anything we have anything we're talking about around growth, intentional, revenue driven, chasing the quarterly earnings, it doesn't matter. It's a gap. Where are we? Where do we want to be? Where are we? Where do we want to be? And so my next question for you, Reagan, is especially around culture. This is the stuff that can be measured. It's a little bit harder to measure. And so do you have any tips for our audience around what are some ways that I can start documenting what the behaviors are so I can understand the culture that I have right now?
Mm-hmm. Ask your employees.
I said jump for Ellen. Hear that, everybody? Ask your employees. How do you do it? How do I I'm guessing it's in dialogue like this, not a survey. I guess it could be that too, but okay.
That depends a lot on company size for sure. And it might be a multi-pronged approach. I think you could probably do if you're a larger organization, you could do a combination of survey, listening sessions, and individual dialogue like this. In smaller companies, just individual dialogue might yield you the best results. But giving employees multiple methods to give you feedback, because everybody's going to have different levels of comfort in being truly honest with you. Some are going to feel like they can be really honest in a survey, and some aren't going to mind telling you right to your face. But find a really comfortable balance in your organization and make sure it doesn't feel punitive. You have to be willing to take the feedback, not take it personal, and not hold that against the employees who are being brave enough to have that conversation with you.
I worked with an organization once, and they were telling me that they were looking for a succession plan, right? So I came in and was doing some analysis for them. And we were talking, and I said, well, coming up with a survey that we can ask, and I would be glad to ask some people in person, and we could also send it out by email, that just kind of gets a lay of the land would be really good. So I would recommend we have a couple of sessions and we build out what the survey would be. Well, 48 hours later, they came up with 5 questions and they sent it out to their employees, and they were furious. They were furious. Why did you say to do this? We don't have this problem. Well, guess what? They did. They thought that they had full trust of their entire employee base. It was a 65-person company. The survey that came back, you could tell the people who were being cagey about their answers, like, I'm not sure what this is going to do to me and what you really want to hear. And the other ones were flat out, I'm just going to tell you how it is. Mm-hmm. And then there were a whole bunch of non-responses too. So, right. So the quality of the questions matter. Because it's a good idea doesn't mean you can execute it really quickly. I want to just put that out there. So everybody wants to go do a survey now, pause, use my example here as cautionary tale. And what came back was the people who straight up said, I don't trust you. I don't trust this. I can't believe in this. It's never the way you say it's going to be. And they were furious because they believed trust was one of their core values. And their employees were not feeling the trust in the organization. And so this is the time where, no, we didn't work together. I gave them the assessment. They went about their business. I said, well, now that you know this, here's what the plan would be, because this is a big deal. And they decided they were going to have their trust issues. And I was like, cool, right time, everything happens in its own time with the right people there. And what I took away was the intention was fantastic to get a pulse, but they were not really willing. They didn't want to hear the feedback. And then they ignored the feedback when they got it. So I just want to underline the fact that if you're not ready for the feedback, you're going to do more harm than good in this listening concept of whatever. So how do we know if we're ready?
Yeah, that's a great question. Wow, I think there's a certain level of vulnerability in that, right? I think there's also some really great research right now by Brene Brown around vulnerability in leadership. And if you're not willing to hear it or set aside your personal ego and pride to really hear the feedback, it will be to the detriment of your employee experience
and your business. That's just your business is not going to grow. In fact, it'll probably decline.
Absolutely.
That's what my experience has told me through companies.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So cautionary tale. We probably ought to go the other way too, right? So here is another organization, startup phase. And in this organization, they had a team of core, I'm going to call them, I don't know what you want to call them. They're the first group of people that said, yes, we're going to do this. Whether they were owners or not, it didn't matter, right? There's this core group of people that said, we're going to get together and we're going to make this happen. And they had varying roles and varying ownership and all of these things. Well, and some didn't have any. And it turned out one of the core owners, their values did not align. And the way that they were looking at the business did not align with everybody else. And so what ended up happening was a very thoughtful, self-reflective survey was given to the entire group. And this, by the way, this came from 9 months of conversation about what is accountability? How do we show up to each other? What do we want our value structure to be in terms of how we have hard conversations and things like that? So there was a lot of great group interactive work in the way that we work together in this team that allowed this survey to come out of that work. And that work allowed, and the survey results allowed, all the things that they had done around hard conversations, around being true to each other, being clear about what each of them wanted, to have conversations, and they made some changes for it. And it's been for the better. And so, this concept of listening and figuring out how do we pull the information out of each other, and our willingness to be able to hear it has to come from constant work. It was 9 months of work to allow that to happen. If they had done that survey at the beginning, it would have been a repeat of the last story I shared. And so we could have the best intention, but when we are intentional, we recognize the timing in that as well. All right, Reagan, I want to know, what makes it bold to proactively engage in your intentional growth?
Gosh, I think I just want to land on vulnerability. I think that's where you'll find the most growth for your business, when you're willing to be a vulnerable leader, when you're willing to do what it takes to listen to your employees and meet their needs.
Everybody, this is Reagan Freed. See, talk about a great conversation. Talk about talent and insight from her 17 years of knowledge. We're going to link to whatever we can find around Brene, Blue Ocean, Tom's book, the Zappos case study, anything else that I have in my notes as well. And you're going to find all of those program notes at voiceofboldbusiness.com/P239. That's voiceofboldbusiness.com/P for program 239. You keep this conversation going. Use our email address, radio@reddirection.com. Use hashtag VBB Radio. Connect with Reagan and I across social media. By the way, LinkedIn is best always. And you've listened, you've watched. Rate the program. What did you think? Tell us on iHeartRadio. Tell us on Apple Podcast. Tell us on YouTube or Facebook, where we're streaming live right now. And stay tuned, because it's what we're learning here and how we apply what has been shared by Reagan today that will allow us to become better leaders, more impactful leaders. And in today's situation, in today's conversation, through intentional growth.
The Voice of Bold Business Radio gives you insights about how to achieve your company's growth strategy. When you aren't seeing the growth results you want, it's time to get an outside perspective. To discuss your specific situation around growth strategy, work with us. Visit voiceofboldbusiness.com and click Find Out More. Special thanks to the Scott Treatment for technical production. Thank you for joining us.